stand by. Glad that you're here with us on Morning Express. It is now 10 minutes after 7 right here in Nairobi, Kenya. It is time for us to get into the newsroom where we look at some of the stories and how we, the members of the Fourth Estate, have done our job and as to whether we have done it accurately and the angles possibly we could have looked at and if we are doing our job of being the watchdog. Let me go straight to introducing the panel this morning, and I'll start with my immediate left here. We have David Ohito, who is the digital editor with us here at Standard Media Group. Thank you for coming and great to have you. Then we have Erick Latiff, who is an online editor with Capital FM. Great to have you as well. Morning. Thank you for coming. Joining us shortly is also Patrick Gadara as we go on with the show, running a little bit late, but he'll be joining us. And let me start off with you, David Ohito, because I know you're part of a committee, the Energy Information and Communication Committee, and this is in regards to the information bill that is to come out today. Maybe first of all, you can just bring us up to speed on exactly what that information bill gives us access to, the members of the public and of course the members of the Fourth Estate.
Thank you very much, Michael. I think for me it's a milestone in the history of media in Kenya. Kenya is one of those nations that have never implemented this law. But the Access to Information Law really seeks to operationalize the Constitution, particularly Article 35 of the Constitution, which enshrines access to information for all members of the country, both public and private, that any individual can apply to access information held by the state or held by private entities, and it is a best practice. One, Kenya is also trying to honor its international obligation. Access to information is a civil liberty enshrined in several international instruments, and I think the Energy and Information Committee have done an excellent job in putting forward a very progressive bill that will make it very easy to access information for members of the public as well as those who are in the practice of journalism. You remember there is one very critical hurdle called the Official Secrets Act.
Correct.
And that particular bill seeks to repeal the Official Secrets Act so that there's no information classified as top secret or which cannot be accessed by either the media or members of the public seeking to know what happened. I'll just take you back to show you that this bill seeks to, inculcate the culture of transparency and accountability. You remember, those of us who've been following even big scandals like NYS saga, the Eurobond, Anglo leasing, Golden Bag, it has been very difficult to access the right information from the offices. But this law now spells out that any public officer or state officer holding that information, you simply apply, and within 21 working days you are expected to be given all the information relating to the queries you raised. There are exemptions, of course, which are also standard best practices across the world, that information relating to, say, security operations, military deployment, those are guarded secrets which may compromise national
state security.
Then in that case you may not access it easily unless it's under oath that you just want to see, but you don't publish the same.
Okay.
But overall, very progressive bill, and we must commend the National Assembly. This is one of the best laws we have seen from the 11th Parliament.
Okay, before I come to you, Eric, and on your thoughts on this particular bill and how it will help us, especially we members of the Fourth Estate, to do our job more accurately and get more information. Is there a procedure, Ohito, on how one has to get that information? Because the bill could give us access to the information, but you get hurdles on the procedure if you don't meet certain requirements, which could be, on the small print.
You simply have to apply that I'm seeking information relating to how, say, 791 million shillings was lost of this ministry, and then the accounting officers can therefore, they are expected within 15 days to reply and acknowledge receipt and say by what date they will give you that information. And within 21 working days, If they don't give you that information, there are penalties spelled out, which is, I think, a fine of 50,000 shillings and perhaps a 3-month jail term.
Okay.
So it's very clear on the law, expressly written in the letter and spirit.
All right. Well, also joining us now is Patrick Gadara, communications expert there at Karibu Sana. And I'll come to you shortly. But maybe, Eric, just to hear your thoughts on how this particular bill is going to arm us in having more accurate news and getting the information that we need generally.
I think it's one of those that you would ordinarily call a game changer bill. Because you see, how the media has been operating is you get information from sources, and these sources could also have doctored this information. You know, people always play their own games. So someone might actually give you information, but because they know you cannot get this information anyhow else how, then they tweak it to suit them. But if now you're actually going to get the official information, and this is the proper information, then there's a lot of transparency in this. Also, the fact that you're spelling out if I apply now, I have 21 days within which to get the information. It's a good thing, because now if I apply and I have 3 weeks, I have this information, then I know what I'm working with. I know I'm working with this story. I have 21 days, I get this information. If I don't get this information, then this is what I'll do. And it's a very good thing. The only issue maybe is who is this who's applying for information? Because you may find one office particularly getting inundated with requests. Ohito wants this, Gadara wants this, Latiff wants this, and all of us want it in 21 days. And I mean, now we have to designate somebody to be responding to this request of getting information, failure to which we're going to be penalized 50,000, 50,000, 50,000. So that is something that you just need to be sorted out, so that it's very clear that if you want this information, then you need to actually be so and so who seeks this information. For example, the media is seeking the information not for their own consumption, it's for the public. So this is when media organization is seeking the information, it's clear that this is public seeking information. When it's David Ohito in his personal capacity seeking information, then also at what level of priority do we give it in terms of requests?
Okay. All right, Patrick Gadara, the information bill, do you agree that it is actually a game changer, or is it one of those that could come and still have hiccups as to how we get stories and we're not able to get? I know you've been very critical, you criticize the media a lot in not doing the whole story and not following up. Is this one of those that will give us that access that we've always wanted to follow up the stories and get the accurate information?
Well, the bill itself is important. The Constitution does guarantee that we should have access to the information that the government holds. So and it's not just for media, but for the public as well. So I think the fact that we've got now a bill, it's taken quite a long while to be drafted and stuff, but the fact that it's there, it's a good thing. I've got to say at the first stage, I haven't read the bill myself. But still, in principle, this is the sort of thing that could change stuff. So we don't just have governments that say stuff, but we have nothing to really hold them to account to. We don't have access to the information that they actually hold. But I think, as Latiff has hinted at, the process of actually getting this information is important. We need to really interrogate that and how that's going to work. The second thing is government tends to classify some information. Now, if we don't look at the classification regime itself, and if they've just got discretion to decide what it is they can issue and what they can classify, then that becomes a loophole they can use to hide. So it's important we also go back and look at those classification regimes and actually start asking about the expiry dates to classification. You can't just classify stuff, for forever. So for example, stuff what government knew in the 70s or in the 50s or in the 60s should be something that we've got access to now. So we can tell the stories about what they were doing then, what they knew then, and how that informed the decisions that they made. So it's important we look, I think, at the mechanics of how this law works as opposed to just what it says.
Okay. David Ohito, as part of the Energy Information and Communications Committee, have we addressed or have you looked at some of those things that Gadara is raising in terms of the government can decide what to classify, and that can now be another way of hiding the information, as it were?
I think there have been very many stakeholder meetings which involve the media themselves, Kenya Editors Guild, Kenya Union of Journalists, the Media Council, Article 19, Transparency International, and International Commission of Jurists, and they have really combed clause by clause. Let me also clarify that we just want to present a memorandum to that Energy Committee, which is the authority or committee entrusted with legislation relating to access to information. And two, this was a private member's motion. It was one of the laws that should have been passed by August 27th this year, but they didn't meet that deadline. But Parliament extended that window by one more year to 2016 August 27th. But the committee has moved and fast-tracked the bill. It's actually sponsored by Priscilla Nyokabi, Nyeri Women's MP, and if you look at the letter and spirit of that law, I think it's world class. I've read lots of access to information bills or laws from Canada, South Africa, UK, and I think they have done an excellent job trying to borrow from the best practices. There are exemptions, as I mentioned, like even in France now under terrorism, there is information which media cannot access. The state has control because it could compromise national security. And I think those clauses that are in our law have really dealt with those issues. I have no problem. But this is the kind of law that will now open up the space and tell the good General Joseph Nkaiseri that you do not need to hit the roof over 3.8 billion shillings, but you need to be accountable and transparent on why this money was transferred to a particular account on the last day of the financial year.
But I think, if I may, and this is where probably David can explain, is national security is pretty broad term,
It's a very big term.
And if the government is simply allowed to class anything they want as national security, and use that to deny you information, then that becomes how they hide. I don't think we should assume the government wants to give information. It doesn't. That's why we need the law.
And that's why it's sponsored by a private member.
Yeah,
not the government.
So it's important that in how the law is drafted and in how the mechanics of how it actually operates and how it works, that we minimize the number of loopholes the government has, and we have mechanisms for vetting when it refuses to give information. When it says national security, it's got to explain to somebody, why is this a matter of national security as opposed to, and not just an issue where, for example, you mentioned Kaiseri. Kaiseri said the 3.8 billion thing was a matter of national security. That's the thing. So if they have discretion to simply say or decide what is and what is not, what they can give, we are still in the same position where they get to decide what they give and what they don't give.
Michael, let me just respond to Gadara's fears. There is a safeguard clause which says in the case of exemption of any information, then there must be justification on why you have to safeguard that information and not available to public. And I think for me, that's a standard best practice, again, borrowed from Canada, UK, South Africa, and we need not to fear. But we must start.
Case, though.
Yes.
In this particular case, is it classified top secret at the point of request, or is it classified top secret, from the very beginning? That when you're dealing with, for example, deployment of troops and such, that is clearly defined as top secret. However, you may ask for information from the Ministry of Irrigation and Water and Irrigation. They can tell you, if I tell you what we're doing about water, it could affect communities. They could start fighting. That is national security.
Not really. If it's about communities, it's about public interest, and that information must be accessible.
And, if I may ask, the justification that they then give for classifying something as national security. Who do they explain this to? Who is that justification given to?
The individual or the entity that...
So there will be...
Yes. And remember, this law seeks to overhaul, repeal the Official Secrets Act.
Right, yes.
So once you repeal that, then you go to the next level.
Okay. And just judging it from this debate we're having right here, it looks like there could be loopholes, and secondly, it looks like it could be a bill that, yes, it's there on paper, but the actual implementation may be a bit of a challenge. Question to you, David Ohito, is there a way we can also disseminate this information to the public once we have the bill passed, so that everybody knows where do I stand? Do I qualify just as an individual, not even as a member of, just as a member of the public, to walk into the office and say, look, I want this information just for my knowledge?
Article 35 of the Constitution of the Republic of Kenya 2010 expressly says any person has a right to request and access information held by another person or held by the state or any entity. So first of all, the Constitution gives you that, and I told you from the beginning that access to information is considered today as a civil liberty. It's a human right for you to access information, because you can use it to protect yourself, you can use it to gain knowledge, you can use it to question transparency and accountability on how you're being governed. It's about your taxes, and which one is why we say I want to refer the good General Kaiseri to that Article 35 of the Constitution. He cannot expect Kenyans 3.8 billion shillings to get lost, and he says it's a national security matter, when the same document he's asking from journalists was tabled before a committee of the National Assembly. And by the way, the Speaker is expected to make a decision and a ruling on the same matter on the floor of the House today. And we must continue asking, why was over 2 billion shillings paid on the last day of the financial year? And Kaiseri won't run away from this. You are this with him.
Okay.
Yes.
Eric, given now that this bill comes through, and of course looking at the issue or the incident of John Garisho, who was arrested, and of course Kaiseri still coming out even after his release to almost say that I have a good reason as to why we had arrested him. Do you think this is going to change even the frame of mind and how we operate?
To be very honest with you, having the law in place is a good thing, but that doesn't necessarily answer everything. It's like we're saying, if for example it's upon Kaiseri to say this was national security, you can go back and say, you know what, this money was deployed on the last day, remember on this day there was an operation somewhere, and I cannot tell you which operation. But ends there. So it's going to be, I think it's one of those things where it's a step. We had the first step in 2010 when we said yes to the Constitution, and the Constitution contained this article that guarantees us this right. The second one is this, and they have a milestone law that says now we operationalize the Constitution with this law. The other one will now be the goodwill and the push and pull between the public and the government, in terms of reaching to that level where the government knows that this information will definitely be needed, be required, and you will have to give it out and explain yourself. We have to get to that level. It will not be immediate, but now because we have, even if we pass this law next week, you will actually go and ask for this information. It will take more than 21 days for you to get that information, or you may get the information after 21 days but heavily redacted, and it doesn't help you.
Okay, now challenges we're likely to face, given that, like I mentioned, Kaiseri still is insisting that he had a good reason as to why the journalist was arrested, despite the, all the media furor that came out after that.
Well, Kaiseri did modify his position a little bit by suggesting that the guy wasn't actually arrested, which goes against the statement he himself made. He said we'll hold him till he reveals his sources. I think what Kaiseri displays is the culture that's prevalent right now within government, which is they don't want to give out information, and if you do actually go around and get it, instead of tackling the issues you raise, they go after you. I mean, we saw it on Monday with Kanolo Bonyo of the KDF, when he said that the KDF is quietly investigating the sources for the JF Justice, the Journalists for Justice report. Not really the allegations that are made in, they are going after the sources. which is atrocious. This is a culture within government. That's going to take a while to get rid of. Very importantly is going to be the role of the judiciary in this, in standing up and enforcing and ensuring that the law is actually enforced. Otherwise you will have a nice piece of paper, that says you can access information, but to all intended purposes, you still can't get it. It's very important that we, as much as possible, close down the loopholes, and minimize them. I know you can't get rid of them altogether, but you minimize them to an extent where the culture within government starts to change, so it becomes a bit more open and a bit more accessible to press and transparent.
All right, let's look at something else, and Harambee Stars.
Just before that, Michael, I would want to say that naming of sources is a cardinal area which is protected by law, and I would want to refer the good general to go and just read a few excerpts of how media operates. The Media Act, it will take him 5 minutes only, and he'll have appraised himself on what...
It's not that he doesn't know, he knows.
That's what I said in the last show, that you expected a person who has risen to the rank of a general to have a world view and not a narrow village view about how media operates. And we were going to mind a good general from the media. We are ready to offer our free services to educate him on what it entails about media operations. And I think you only, if he has, I'm told, made a joker handles his media, you can advise him to go to the Complaints Commission if he has an issue with the story which was published. He can also seek a court order, which is the only instrument that can compel a journalist to name his sources of information. But to call a press conference and say, it shows absolute ignorance of what the law says.
Is it really just ignorance of the law, or
impunity? I think
it's impunity. And actually, just point out to another thing. Many countries have freedom of information laws, but even how requests are drafted is really important in whether you actually do get to access the information you want. So training of journalists and the public about how you actually write, how you fill in your request, the sort of language you use, the exactitude that's required, that's going to be important.
Okay.
And I think for Kaiseri, just to finish, what he was doing there, he was just playing politics. He's handed this document into the National Assembly. Somebody in the National Assembly, not the committee formally releasing this information to the media, but somebody within the committee releasing the information to a journalist and telling him, look, which is fine. But then Kaiseri knows. I know who's given you the information, but I want to silence that person who's given you the information.
Let me clarify here.
That's all he was doing.
Let me clarify a few facts here. I was at the Speaker's office yesterday for about 45 minutes. We went through the Hansard, and the information that was published by the media houses, the three journalists, James Mbaka, Alphonse Shiundu, and John Girachu, were actual excerpts written and recorded from the Hansard and read by a member of the committee that was investigating how 3.8 billion was paid. So for a general to come out and name your sources, he can simply call for the Hansard from the National Assembly. And I think this is really an attack on the media. Kaiseri must go back and find, and I didn't expect this from a man who has been in the military for 30 years, in the opposition ranks for a good number of years, and to turn back and say, if he has issues of what was paid for, the second-hand guns and the helicopters which are being repaired in Eastern Europe, let him come out and say, we will hold him to account.
So the information was accurate, really?
Yes, very accurate. You can go to the Hansard.
Okay.
Or you can go to any court and we shall repulse him there with facts and figures.
Okay. Yeah. All right, let's move on now to sports in Kenya. And we've always had this debate as to whether we report our sports in the manner that it should. But now looking at our team, Harambee Stars, leaving and arriving in Cape Verde barely 2 hours before the game. And finally, we have it now making to one of the front pages of the Daily Nation. Are we being fair to our sports?
No, we're not.
Eric?
We're not. Look, this is where that story is, and it's about Nyamwea, whatever. Look, We're still talking about
Politics.
Politics. Come on. Harambee Stars, these guys, they worked very hard. They have not been paid their allowances for so many months. They come and play against Cape Verde here. They play well. They score one. They have an advantage. They want to go back there and maybe park the bus or whatever the strategy would be, and see that they at least advance to the next stage. What do? We sabotage it. And then instead of highlighting that as a main issue, we treat it as a small issue. That players can go and camp at Wilson Airport for close to 10 hours, not sure whether they're traveling. On the final day, risking the country being banned for 2 years and fined. And what you're putting on the headline is, my girlfriend. Really?
If I may, I think in general the focus on the woes of Harambee Stars kind of obscures the wider issue, and I think that's where the media should really concentrate. Nyamwaya was accused a few months ago in a German TV expose of having pocketed 50 million. Shillings. Locally, there hasn't been much discussion of this. Just as we followed the whole expose of corruption within FIFA, but nobody asked about corruption in FKF.
Because we don't regard sports as a big story.
I don't think so. I think it's, for me, I think we lose the context. We're very happy to run with the international story of FIFA, but not really contextualize it locally. What does it mean? Because if you look at how the FIFA thing played out, and the involvement of the heads of regional and local federations, it should have led us to ask, what's going on. And the fact that it took a German station to be saying that actually these guys stole 50 million from Kenyans, is something that should really be ringing alarm bells. So right now he's being quizzed about the flight. But the flight is really the least of our problems, just a manifestation of a deeper rot. And that's what we need to be concentrating on, is that rot and getting that fixed.
David Ohito, your take on how we have treated sports, especially in Kenya, from the media perspective?
Well, not very much on the front line as key agenda items for news, as much as, and particularly football, we have glorified European leagues at the expense of the local leagues, and two, we have not done a good job as journalists trying to expose. I don't know what magic one Sam Nyamwaya has used to grip the entire sports journalism in Kenya, that there's literally no journalist that can question Nyamwaya. I'm told they do his press releases. I'm told he has a grip in some magic round that is very difficult to attack him. But I think it has reached a point when we must take action, and if it needs sanitization, this is the moment. I think the entire sports fraternity, if you read the stories of our hard-working athletes, the stories of our hard-working footballers, I expected Stars to lose by a margin of 5-0, 5-4.
Yeah.
After a jet lag, and you get into a pitch, play for 90 plus minutes,
and they held it for 40 minutes, 45 minutes without
conceding a goal. You could see the spirit, and I could see the social media messages from some players, or Michael Olunga, the engineer player, and really they were saying we are doing it for Kenya, but we have not had support from the federation, we have not had support from the government. And when a national football team is going to play, it's a function of two entities, one the federation and the other government. So we must hold people accountable. It's not only Nyamwaya who should be quizzed. We should be asking, where was the cabinet secretary for sports? Is he sleeping on the job, or is saying there's somebody else again running away from responsibility? Where is the sports secretary? Those are hard questions we expect to see our colleagues raising in tomorrow's bulletins and in subsequent bulletins. This is the kind of jokes that we cannot allow if we want to run football or
All right, Eric, what would you expect now from here?
Even in today's headlines, come on, look, we do not have anything about Harambee Stars even making it big. We are still
the back page.
We are on ICC and Waiguru and the politics. But remember, there's a conversation we had here a couple of months back, and Clay Muganda was sitting here, and he was saying, you know what, when we have sports desks that are sort of relegated, you push to the corner as a sports desk. You guys are pillars. You do 2 pages at the back of my paper, and when it comes to the bulletin, you actually come at the very end. I have news, I have business, and then I have sports.
More important things.
I have sports. And that time the director has been told, listen, your bulletin should have ended at 12:30 and it's now 28, so key stories. So you end up having a sports bulletin that's just 2 stories or 3 stories. This is what happens. And this is what manifests itself. And I think the bigger picture, like Gavara is saying, for me the bigger picture is within the media houses, like we've said before, get to a point where we are actually elevating sports editors to sit on the editorial boards. Because if you've had someone like Kamanamari, for example, rising to the very top and being, for example, an editorial director, this is a man who knows sports back to front. He's a man who has passion for sports, and you will start seeing the impact of that. IAAF has started an investigation into Kenya on doping.
Right.
Where is that story?
Where
is the story? We risk being disqualified from going to Rio. Where is that story, and what does that mean? When they say that doping is a deep rot in Kenya, really? Where is the story? How can we?
Gabara, sports is obviously something that we take pride in as Kenyans, but it seems to only happen when we win. Right. If we don't win, the rest just disappear somewhere. Erick Latiff brings up an important point of doping, which has been an issue for a while, but we never seem to see anything in the front pages, or at least as a major story. Can we change that?
We absolutely can change that. I think if the media was we were much more interested, and sometimes they just put this down to a lack of curiosity. If we are looking to come up with exposés, for example, remember Lance Armstrong with the cycling issue, was brought down by media reports. Essentially people who went in and investigated how is this happening. My point is, if in Kenyan journalists wanted to find out, how is this doping going on, what's happening, what is the wing, etc., and actually put the resources to go out and investigate it, then we could be in a much better position. We don't have to wait for the IAAF to be the one telling us that this is happening. And then second, even on the issue of corruption, our very own athletics commission has been implicated in this, and it's wider. And my point is, across all the entire sports fraternity, there are much deeper issues as to how sports are run. And if we put the resources to actually ventilate on this, to bring it out into the open, this is what happens, then we would have a much better position to start to actually rebuild the infrastructure for supporting sports. In which case then we wouldn't always constantly be whining how we're losing, but we'd be more putting it on a much firmer grounding, much firmer footing, so that we could actually be winning and everybody be happy.
All right, David, you sit in many leadership forums where you influence how media houses work, and so the perspective that we have. Can this be done, or is it because that sports, we know that at the end of the day bills have to be paid, and we are driven by commercial, sort of news that will sell? Is it that sports doesn't sell, and how do we make this change? How do we ensure that sports, particularly in Kenya, does hit the headlines, because it is a national interest?
Yes, I agree with you that we have been using the installment approach, that when we win the road races in the world cities, then it's on page 1. When we win a match that is significant, maybe on back page or somewhere, as mentioned, the second story. I think we should start paying much attention, but we must structure sports first of all. There must be transparency and accountability. I expected by now to know who are the next tire of players who will succeed Wanyamas when they retire, because they'll not be at the scene. And my good friend Erick Latiff here would tell you that if you look at successful sporting nations, you know, it's structured. You have under 21, you have under 18, or under 17 if you like, you are under 15, you are under 11. So if from where you sit in the newsroom, even as a sports journalist, you know, these are the crop of players.
Where we're going.
Yeah, we will represent
rugby. I mean,
same with rugby, same with even athletics.
Again, I go back to the infrastructure flourish, you know, for all of this. I was in South Africa about 2 weeks ago, and we had a presentation from Jonathan Plavert, who was quite instrumental in the Sunday Times or Sunday Telegraph investigation into FIFA, which is what actually brought out all the corruption and stuff and led to eventually governments taking on FIFA. You know, and if he explained how step by step they went, how they got sources within, and they actually at some point posed, you know, as people who wanted to influence the awarding of the World Cup. I think in this case he was posing as American or something, you know, and through that they were able to get footage, you know, etc. of people, you know, asking for bribes, you know, to go. Now I'm wondering if we did this locally, you know, if our journalists went out to actually expose the malaise and rot that underlies our sports, you know, instead of us just being guys who talk about scores, you know, oh, Harambee Stars lost, and we are very sad. The Kenya rugby team went to the World Cup, to Olympics, and we are very happy, you know. But to actually interrogate the infrastructure of sport, you know, and how it is, and to understand that these are national issues. These are not, I mean, when there's corruption in FKF, it's not just an issue for footballers. You know, it's a national issue. You know, corruption anywhere it manifests is an issue for everybody. It's a problem for everybody because we all lose out. You know, so we put the resources to actually expose what's going on. Then society can have an opportunity to fix it. Otherwise, we'll constantly be in this loop where we whine about losing. We are happy when we win once in a while, and then we go back to whine.
But Michael, if you look at the way the administration of, say, football is done in Kenya, which serious corporate would want to sponsor such a mess? I mean, we must be serious. There must be some level of transparency, accountability, you know, structures which are authentic, you know, people who are, you know, credible running those offices for serious corporates to support. Am I right?
It's true, and that's where the media, I think, would come in strongly if we highlight, like Avara is saying, if we highlight the mess and the rot that's there, because they use that, the fact that we are not reporting it, that they operate under the shadows. Somebody receiving a lot of money from the international federations, all these international federations, they're sending a lot of money to Kenya, and the guys who are running the sport in Kenya are just playing around with that cash because nobody's going to report about it. But if we started reporting about it, then we'll start putting them to account.
Okay.
And that's why I say that it's not really the writer who is to blame. I think let's go up. This should come from the editorial directors and the managing editors. But they decide, for example, in the Mail and Guardian case, it must have been at the top that they decided we are dedicating resources, we are dedicating a team, go out there, bring the story.
Find out what's going on.
Perhaps we need to send Alan Namu and Moha this time round.
Yes.
Come here, guys.
Absolutely. And maybe it could also be the language that we use. I mean, let's take corruption, because this has a lot to do with the sport. It has a lot to do with the nation. It has a lot to do with corruption.
Yes.
And looking at corruption and even some of the way we put our stories across. Let's take, for example, the meeting that the president had in Eldoret with certain leaders, and it led to headlines. And very interesting headlines. One of them, of course, was talking about the fury of the president with Alfred Keter. But the one that stood out was the Star, which was saying that Waiguru is not my girlfriend, says the president. Is that what would sell more than? Yet it's the same story.
If I may, I think it was atrocious for me to see the Star headline. You know, I think that was really just sensationalizing what really should be a serious issue. Whether or not the president has a girlfriend or not is not the big problem. You know, our big problem is one as to whether our public officers are accountable. And what he told Keter was particularly important, because essentially he was telling a legislator that you take CDF, which is unconstitutional, and go develop your area. Don't interfere with government. This is somebody, the legislator, whose constitutional role is to oversight government. He's not interfering with it when he is doing his job. And these are the sort of things I would want the media to highlight. That the fact is the president is essentially bullying legislators. The very people meant to hold him to account. He's putting them under the cosh. And we need to be aware and alive to this, because it will take us back to times as we saw during the Moi era, when legislators were simply a rubber stamp for what the executive wanted. So for me, that was a much more graver issue than whether or not
Erick, do you feel like the story was almost diluted just by that headline?
And then the digital media, it will tell you, there's something we call clickbaiting. This is pure clickbait. You see a headline, you want to click. You see that, you want to read. The natural curiosity, really, he said that. Really, I mean, it's been there in the public, but he actually came out.
He admitted to that.
He came out and talked about it. So the headline sold the paper. Whether the story itself was what needed to be the headline is, like I think it's a different story altogether.
Okay. Ohito, on your take
on this, I really want to come to the defense of the president. Media is about accuracy, fairness, impartiality. If we are going to sink our ethics below the table, then it's not right. We know very well who the wife of the president is, First Lady Margaret. We know the president has a family, first family. We know so well that has been documented. It's available on record. And if at all the president wanted to clarify about his relationships, he would have said it in a very clear manner. When you read through the content, the quotes about the story, those are mere insinuations. And ethically, from where I sit, I think it was wrong, but maybe aimed at clickbaiting, but that's an embarrassment that an editor should be held responsible for. I think you don't have to ridicule the president just because of some insinuations. If you read the text and letter of that quote, which purported to have been referring to Madam Waiguru, it's very unfair. Waiguru is also a family person, and that really cuts her in the wrong way.
I would say this. If indeed an editor decides that the character of the president is important, and whether or not he cheats on his wife, it then tells us something about his character, that is fine, but do that story, do the work. Don't report the insinuations. Go do your investigation, the same way they do elsewhere. Report what your investigation is, what your facts are. But don't just use it as a foil on the front page to sell papers. This is my point. It's not a serious story that they're presenting. And in doing this, they're neglecting the much more important issues that we should actually be interrogating and be doing.
And it's the second time we in the media have done it in the last 1 week. Last week, or was it Friday or Thursday? Media quoted former President Kibaki as telling Uhuru to listen to Raila.
Right.
And they used one statement that he made in Kikuyu, in which he did not mention Uhuru, he did not mention Raila, he did not mention government, he did not mention leaders. He said nothing of the sort. That interpretation, and he was not talking about government, he was not talking about why it's important for leaders to listen to each other, or why the government is, I feel the government is not going in the right direction. He was basically talking like Mr. Kibaki does, stood up at a funeral, he was talking, and it was Friday. And he said, even those who you don't like, just listen to them. He is telling the people there. He has not talked in the context of politics or government or governance. It becomes a headline, Kibaki tells Uhuru to listen to Raila. It becomes the top story. It's not even clickbaiting. I looked at that and I was like, wait a minute. I need to look for this quote. Where is it? Where is he saying? I think that to me was low. It was even lower than
Waiguru being the president's girlfriend and those accusations. Okay, as we wind up, the attacks in Paris, and one of the things that stood out for me, and I noticed compared to many of the ones that we have seen here when it comes to terrorist attacks, is that we didn't see much of the victims. Yet the story was still told out. Ohito, in terms of how we do our coverage when it comes to such sensitive matters and how possibly that was done, your comments on that?
Well, I think the media did a good job, broke the story almost in real time. There were real footages of President Hollande being, shepherded out. But more, it's not about the images sometimes. It's about how you present the case, and I was much more interested in the response, reaction time. This case, we didn't have an helicopter which has taken a family to Mombasa, and you can deploy the, the defense instantly. The way the commandos reacted, I think that for me was the biggest lesson.
Did you get that information from the reportage that was there?
Yes, it was very clear how they responded in almost real time and saved what would have been a massacre. And I was saying, could this have happened at, say, Taj Mall or Thika Road Mall? What would we be talking about? How fast would our security officers responded? But there are also big questions. What happened with the French intelligence? These are big questions. Should we open our borders to these people who are now coming in, posing for a few months and then turning against us? It has really brought into question several issues. And for the first time since 1848, the President of France addressed a joint house. You can imagine. There's so many milestones covered in that story. Yes, it's not just about images, but you can see several angles which have come out from that story.
Okay. Erick Latiff, your take on how we got the information from all the different media houses, given that it was not really about the image. Yet, from some of the testimonies of the witnesses, there was a lot of bloodshed, there were bodies all over, but we don't see that anywhere.
Well, you see it if you actually went online and you saw some of the main online publications, like the main online. You'll find what they don't show you is the gory, like a dead body. But you will see blood. For example, there's one shot they have of the Bataclan Theatre from from up, and you can see all the blood and how it just looks bad. When you talk about bloodshed, really at some point you will not avoid showing some images, but how gory is it? The thing that stood out for me was, yes, we were covering this news real time, and this is international media, and sometimes Kenyans on Twitter like bashing us on how we are covering the news. But if you looked by 2 p.m., CNN was telling us the death toll is 153. BBC was telling us slightly above 100. Sky was giving us a different figure. So everybody, and these are major international organizations, have their own figures. And CNN was sticking to that 153, and I kept wondering, wait a minute, so let's go with the CNN figure of 153, Sky, I don't have a figure. BBC are saying maybe about 80 have died in the theater. So there's still, it shows you that, as you're covering this, there's what you have as official communication, but there's also in relaying real-time events,
It's bound to be those.
Bound to be.
Okay, we need to wind up, Gabara. Very briefly, your comments on how the story panned out.
I think, these guys have talked a bit about the imagery. I think for me, imagery should only be used if it's got a news value to it, that you're doing. But I think more importantly, that our media can learn from how the Paris attacks are being covered is how the investigation itself is unfolding. It's unfolding very much in the press, from the raids that we're seeing across in Germany.
So we'll have to wind up. Time is really
but I'm saying, when we look at our situation, if you compare, for example, what happened in Garissa or in Westgate, and how we didn't follow up with the investigation, what's it going on, etc.
Okay.
This is something that I think we can pick up.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. That is where we're going to wind up Newsroom this morning. Patrick Gadara, who is a communications expert, Erick Latiff, an online news editor with Capital, and David Ohito, who is a digital editor with Standard News. That's where we wind up News Hour, Newsroom this morning. And News Hour is coming up next, so don't go away.